Buenas and half a day. Manana Sizu, Samtu Todos. Many of God's blessings to each and every one of you here this morning. This informational briefing on the Governor's Transition Committee report is called to order. It is now, what time? 11:05 a.m. Ladies and gentlemen, joining me here this morning is our Legislative Secretary, Senator Amanda Shelton. Sijus Masi for coming. The Chairperson on Committee on Rules, Senator Regine Bisco-Lee. Sijus Masi for coming. I see Senator Therese Terlahi, my Vice Chair, I apologize, is also here. Senator Kelly Marsh-Titano, Senator Mary Torres. I also have Minority Leader Senator Will Castro. Good morning. The Chairperson on the Office and Finance Budget, Senator Joseph Sanagustin Sijus Masi, and Senator Jim Moylan. Thank you for being with us this morning. On the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, we have the Governor's Transition Team here to discuss the transition report. And I want to note for the record, this report is mandated by Section 1502D of Chapter 1 of Title V Guam Code Annotated. And we have called this informational briefing in order to give the transition team the opportunity to apprise the legislature as well as the public about our Magahaga's transition. The transition report can be found on the Messages and Communications page on the Guam Legislature's website at www.guamlegislature.com. And I want to do some rules of engagement. In the interest of time, we will give the governor's team this opportunity to present the report. We will then have the first round of questions and answers. Each senator will be allowed to post their questions to the team. Any additional questions will be facilitated, even maybe at a later time. And I again want to thank the everyone for being here, all of you guys for being here, and we will now have the transition report, the transition team present their report, and I'd like to thank Chairperson Dr. Mary Okada and Dr. Laura Souter for being here, and you can help me present your panel. You're more than welcome. There are many chairs there on the panel. If your team needs to come up to present, please don't hesitate to join the chair. Sijus Masi. Consigi por favor.
Manana Sijus. That was one of the first things I learned as being part of the transition team, was to welcome everyone by saying Manana Sijus.
Sijus Masi.
Speaker Tina, Rose Muña Barnes, and senators of the 35th Guam Legislature, the transition team today is here to present a very brief provide a very brief presentation on the numerous contributions from various members of our community, from members of the government agencies, and I want to personally thank everyone who has contributed their time, their effort, their energy in putting this transition report together. Throughout or since November 9th, 2018, when the team first met, the team jumped on board and started to collect all the information. There is a lot of information that was collected by these various members, and the result of their efforts are presented in this 215-page report that has been presented to the Magahaga for her consideration. So on behalf of the transition team, I want to personally thank all of the individuals that have contributed to this report and their time and effort spent on this. The overarching theme associated with this report, we identified in this report that there are 5 major areas that kind of provide the framework of areas that we can improve on. And those 5 areas include technology, accessing and utilizing technology to perform some of the basic functions that we do, the procurement process that we all know that has been a very tedious process for many of the government agencies in purchasing the goods and services needed to support our government. Customer service, providing the best customer service to all the constituents that we serve. Of course, government infrastructure, and this deals with the facility usage and the processes that we employ to provide these services to our people. And of course, the productivity, which is embedded in the over 10,000 government of Guam workers that support our government. The government of Guam is the largest employer on our island, and we want to ensure that the goods and services that we are providing to our people are done with support that this government can give them in terms of supplies, in terms of training, in terms of conducive working environments, and the like. So we do have some of the committee chairs that are here to present their committee reports. And let me first ask Dr. Laura Souter if she would like to add anything to begin.
This report represents a lot of love, a lot of commitment. It's an engagement that was voluntary from start to finish, and it represents real civil action. Because, you know, very often we think that our people don't care, that all they do is criticize the government. But, you know, I think we need to pause and remember that we are the government, that people, electorate, form the government and shape leadership because we elect leadership, and we demand from leadership response by way of laws, by way of policies, by way of administrative practices. So I think that it's important to recognize that this report represents a labor of love, represents a lot of professional thought. We have 9 subcommittees that comprise the transition team, but a lot of the subcommittees had many subcommittees as well. And this drew from the wisdom, from the professional practice and knowledge of a lot of people outside of government as well as in government. So I think we need to pause and recognize and give thanks to that commitment. The other thing is, you know, the government of Guam is often the scapegoat for everything that goes wrong on our island. And everybody knows it needs fixing in many ways, because agencies of government always need fixing. They need to continue to change to meet the demands of the time. The report also reflects that recognition, that much needs to be changed. Procedures need to be updated, that customers, because the government of Guam is, after all, a service agency. So customers have to be central to the mission of every agency. How we serve our customers best determines how well-oiled and well-producing the organization is. There are a lot of inefficiencies, and the Magahaga and the Segundo Magatlahi are very committed. They were committed as candidates when they established a platform of change that they offered, and they're committed as elected officials to pursue a philosophy of transformation in government, to make it more efficient. Not necessarily in the corporate or business sense of the word, but in, you know, to produce profit. But the profit of government is good service, is happy citizens, right? And so it's a difficult task. It's not going to happen overnight, and it can't happen without the members of the legislature. So part of, I think, the rationale for taking the opportunity to present to you is to also present the daunting task of collaboration. Very often we think of government agencies and the legislature as, because they're different branches of government, that they're somehow separate. Agencies in government, the departments, work in silos. That is one of the most daunting challenges that we have today, is to eliminate the siloism of the way we operate in government. We're one island, we're one community, and yet we've proliferated a bureaucracy that separates effectiveness because we've siloed our operations. So if agencies are not communicating with each other, if within agencies branches don't communicate with each other, then you're not serving the customer well, because the customer has to go here, there, and everywhere to get something done that, if they were collaborating, could be done in one instance. So this underlies the effort of the Transition Committee, is to explore ways to identify priorities for those changes and to become, rather than crisis management oriented, to become proactive engagers of change. We can't do it without you, and we can't do it without the community understanding that change hurts, that some things are not going to be popular, some things are not going to be impressive, some things are not even going to be visible. But things are happening when people recognize that they have to change the way they do things in order to get different kinds of results. So
the presentation with the chairperson that covers boards, commissions, and governments, Attorney Anita Arreola.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Speaker Muña Barnes, chairwoman, as well as members of the committee. I was the chair of the Committee on Boards, Commissions, and Governance in the Transition Advisory Committee, and the members of my team were, and continue to be, Yolanda Berdallo, Attorney Mike Gatewood, Attorney Jeff Moots, Michael Weekly, and Attorney Vanessa Williams. Vanessa and Michael Weekly are here with me today. The others, unfortunately, could not be here. Our subcommittee was tasked with providing the governor-elect and lieutenant governor-elect with a list of all boards, commissions, and individual appointments statutorily required under Guam law. And we've provided that with our report as Exhibit A in the list of all boards and commissions. And in Exhibit B, we have a list of all the current members of the boards, the expiration of their terms, and the statutory requirements for all of their members. We wanted to prepare this list because, as you might know, the campaign platform for the Lou and Josh campaign was to provide efficiency, accountability, and transparency in their administration. And a big part of that is the membership of the boards and commissions for each of the different agencies, as well as for each of the different policy boards. And the members of the boards and commissions, as you well know, are the people who are going to deliver that public policy. They're going to make the public policy not just for the government, but for all of the citizens of Guam. And so it's extremely important that the administration appoint people that they believe are competent and well qualified to these boards and commissions. But in order to do that, they needed to know what the statutory requirements are, as well as what their expiration dates are, and who all the current members are, and the positions that they needed to fill. Our report is pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to read through it all. I'm just going to give you the highlights of the recommendations that we had. We found that there were approximately 112 boards, commissions, and councils with a combined total of approximately 945 statutorily required members for all boards, commissions, and councils. Currently, there are 632 sitting board members and 313 vacant or expired board positions. I hope that you will agree that when we made those findings and we found out all those different boards and commissions, we found it astounding, really, that there were that many boards and commissions and that many members that were required by law to be filled in an island as small as ours. And so, we have numerous recommendations, and one of the very first ones was to establish a depository of the lists of boards and commission members, because most surprising to us was the fact that we could not find any one particular agency or depository like the governor's office or the Guam legislature that had current lists of the board members, the statutory requirements, and what was needed to appoint these different board members. Our second recommendation was to abolish several boards and commissions. We found that many boards and commissions had not met in years, and we believe that their abolition should be considered, and we recommended numerous commissions or boards that could be abolished. We found that there was an interesting law that we found that was passed back in 1989, Public Law 26-119, which stated that any board or commission or council that hadn't met in the last 12 months, they would automatically be abolished if they hadn't been met within that particular period, but we didn't know whether that law applied only at the time it was enacted in 1989 or whether it applied prospectively. We think an argument could be made for both, but I think the bottom line is that since there's no actual listing of boards and commissions and councils that have been actually abolished, we are left with the problem of having these boards and commissions still on the books and still under Guam law. And so if there's going to be any kind of a comprehensive solution, they need to be specifically listed and abolished. And the enabling acts need to be repealed. The alternative is the new administration can simply not make any appointments to these boards and commissions. But, if we're talking about real change and concrete change in our government, I think it's really critical that we at least have a working idea and knowledge about what these boards and commissions are and whether they continue to exist or not. Our third recommendation was to consolidate several boards and commissions. We have listed all of the ones that we thought should be consolidated, and our advice is that if we just consolidate the 26 boards and commissions that we have listed in our report, this would result in a total of 9 boards and commissions rather than 26, and already that would be a huge amount of, not having duplication of effort or duplication of issues and concerns with different departments and councils. Our next recommendation was to provide sufficient resources for current boards and commissions. Many of the boards and commissions do not have home offices. One of the prime examples is the Guam Parole Board. They haven't had a home office or hearing room for many years. We believe that this administration, and we hope the Guam legislature, will give the boards and commissions whatever exists at the end of this, at the end of the day, that they will give them the amount of resources that they need to do their job. It's incredible that the Guam Parole Board has had to go from one place to another, that they've had to use different schools in order to meet and in order to provide a very important service to our community about whether or not to give parole and to have parole hearings to different inmates. But when I discussed this matter with other members of the Lou and Josh team, it was very clear to me that not just the Guam Parole Board, but many other boards and commissions didn't have a permanent office, they didn't have a permanent place to stay. I received comments and complaints about how some people didn't even have, pens and pencils, legal pads in order to take minutes of meetings or to, just do the work, the policy work that's needed for boards and commissions. They didn't have video or audio recordings or anything else to help them fulfill their statutory duties. And so that's a big recommendation that we had in order to require and allow these commissions to do their work. Another recommendation was that we recommended that members be appointed to boards and commissions critical to the Lou and Josh campaign platform. And one of those boards and commissions is certainly the Guam Ethics Commission that has never had any members ever since its enactment into law many years ago. Another recommendation was to enforce the law concerning the posting of minutes of meetings. When we went on to the website of the Office of Public Auditor, very, very few boards and commissions post their minutes of meetings. There are some boards, for example, like the one that chairman or chairwoman Dr. Souter is on, where they routinely, regularly, and faithfully post their minutes of meetings onto the OPA website. Not true with virtually all of the other boards and commissions. That's a requirement of law, and it's unbelievable that boards and commissions aren't told that this law is enforceable and that they should be required to post their minutes of meetings on all of that website. This requirement ensures accountability of all of the boards and commissions and informs the public and the administration whether they're fulfilling their purpose and mission. Another recommendation is to attain a goal of appointing equal numbers of men and women to boards and commissions. We currently have a law that requires each board or commission, of which at least 4 members are appointed by the governor, to include at least 2 members from each gender. But we believe that there should be a bigger requirement and a bigger goal, and that goal should be appointing equal numbers of men and women to boards and commissions. Those are all of the recommendations of our subcommittee, but I do just want to add one more thing that we didn't have the time to add, and I found this out subsequently. So, as you all know, most of the boards and commissions, actually just about all of the boards and commissions, they have to give notice of their board meetings, and they can do that by giving public notice, in a news publication. They can do it, by posting it in a news publication or on the radio, or they can do it by posting it online at the Department of Administration. We don't have that website. That's never been, produced. It's never been something that DOA has done. And that is, I think, something that could save the agencies and boards a lot of money. All you have to do is put a website. In this day and age, setting up a website is, I'm not very good at it, I'm not very proficient, but setting up a website is something that I think most young people can do in like 5 seconds. I can tell you my sons can do it. But setting up a website on DOA for public notices of meetings is so cheap, it's so easy to do. And it's something that would, get rid of the requirement of requiring posted notice in the newspaper, which is so costly. And so that would be our final recommendation. I'm open to any questions or concerns of any of the committee members. Oh, I'm sorry. Mary Okada just pointed out that one of our recommendations, which I missed, was reducing the number of the members of the boards and commissions. Thank you, Mary. That's a huge, critical fact, because as you can see from our report, many boards and commissions have in excess of 7 members. Some have 21 members, some have 28 members, some have 22 members. Many have 9 or 10 members, and that's just really, that's just really ridiculous in this day and age, especially when we have access to video conferencing, to Skype board meetings, to teleconferences. Our recommendation is that the numbers of members of the boards and commission be reduced to only 5 for each board and commission. I remember in looking at several of the statutes that there was the legislative intent that many of the boards and commissions should have at least 7 because they had problems with meeting the quorum requirements. And so they thought 7 was a good number, or 9 was a good number to have at least, 3 or 4. But really, in this day and age when we can have telephone conferences or video conferences, there's really no reason why we should have more than 5 board members. And I can tell you in the meetings that we've had with the Lou and Josh team and with their, prospective board members and their cabinet members, we have, I think, impressed upon them that Lou and Josh this administration wants board members who are going to do the work and not people who are going to come up with excuses to not be there and to not do the work. And so because of that, one of our recommendations is that we reduce the number of members to all the boards and commissions to at least 5. So if you have any questions or
Yeah.
concerns?
If I may, Ms. Anita, thank you, and to my colleagues, I apologize if you didn't hear. Because of time and what we need to work with, I'm hoping that the administration could do the full transition reporting and ask my colleagues to write all their questions down, and as soon as the presentation's done, because you guys have 9 sections here, and I'm hoping that all of the team members that are here from the transition team can stay so that our colleagues can address it per chapter and maybe just write their questions down, if I may. I did acknowledge that in the beginning of the rules of engagement, so I'm hoping that you guys could be given that fair chance to do your whole presentation. And ask my colleagues to please go ahead and work with me on that.
Speaker, I am going to have to leave, but I'll see if the other members of my committee can stay. You have to go also. Michael's not here either.
Because of Chapter 1 and
really
Ms.
sorry.
You'll would have to leave. I'll go ahead and open
Are there any questions?
to
or
give her that
concerns?
consideration.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Therese, did you have your hand up?
So the public website, yes, it's a great idea. The Office of Technology was tasked to do that, and we've actually followed up in public hearings, maybe several times. And I was wondering, the transition report also talked to the Office of Technology because they made it sound like it was a very complicated process. It was not something like we thought could be done very easily. And that was their explanation pretty much. And I do intend to follow up this term again, but I was wondering, I didn't look at that in the transition report, if the Office of Technology was consulted or not.
We didn't personally consult the Office of Technology, and as I said, this latest recommendation came after we had started talking to people about setting up the website, and when particular or prospective board members brought it to our attention that, you know, it's in the law that
Yes.
you know, you could put notice on the DOA website, but it just hasn't been done. Thank you. But it just hasn't been done.
Yeah.
You know, if there are difficulties, we need to get over those difficulties because, and I don't really understand why that would be so expensive, but we need to get over those difficulties because in this day and age, many people, they go online. That's where they get their information. They don't necessarily get it through a paper newspaper or on the radio any further. And so, you know, even if it can be a temporary website until a final website can be done, that's certainly an idea that can be.
All of that we've asked them, so yes, I guess we'll just have to follow up them if none of the transition committee did, yeah.
Thank you, Senator Chalai. Senator Torres?
Thank you for bringing up that last point about the composition, because that was my question. But the one point I just want to make to add to your comments is that it is so critical, especially in those allied health boards where licenses are involved, and sometimes there's a delay of months before we can license nurses or you know, those critical positions. So I'm glad that you were able to make that recommendation.
Right, and you know, the law also says that you know, the members of the boards and commissions, they have to come to these meetings, and if for any reason they don't come up if they don't show up after a certain period of time, the governor, for the governor's own appointees, can remove them. But then there's a provision in the law that says, you know, except for excused absences, and our finding is that many of the boards you know, have commonplace excuses, and it's routine for people to say, oh, you're excused. But I can tell you that in the meetings that we had with Lou and Josh's cabinet members and campaign people and prospective board members, we have told them that should not be a routine occurrence. You know, excuses, you know, we can understand excuses where you know, there's a once-in-a-lifetime event or something, but, you know, they should not be commonplace.
Thank you. Senator San Augustine? Thank you, Senator Torres.
Thank you, Speaker. It's actually geared towards Dr. Okada, because you're the chair, right? Okay. 215 pages. I got a copy right here in front of me. Does the governor support this report and the recommendation? That's one question.
So our task was to provide a list of recommendations to the governor for her consideration. So a copy of the report has been given to the Imagahaga, and so there are some steps that she's taking to employ some of the recommendations, but we've not had a one-on-one conversation with her as to which particular areas that she supports or not support. Our job was to provide her with the recommendations.
Okay, thank you, because I pretty much went through the whole report. Took me quite a few hours, and I agreed to a lot of the recommendation, and I agree with what was presented about the boards and commission. Sure, let's close it down, let's remove them. But on the same instance, some of the boards that we're recommending to be removed, gosh, we just appointed somebody to the Women's Affairs, and that's one board that's being recommended, if I'm correct. That should be found on page. And I'm just saying that as I go through all this, and as appointments are being made, and as my colleagues that have oversight on these agencies that have these boards, I honestly believe that unless we hear the green light from the governor and the lieutenant governor saying, yes, please support the transition, then we can get to work and saying, okay, we go into the law, let's remove them. We go into the law and we says, let's reduce them. Because the areas you talked about in revenue and tax, I had recommended that last year to consolidate them. But at the same time, there's banking and insurance that needs to be merged also to that same, because they're in the same hallway. And I agree with what you're recommending, but I just wanted to hear it because you're part of the Governor's Transition Commission. Okay, and I wanted to make sure that there's movement, because there's 215 pages, like I said, and there's quite a few of us that are going to be very busy, and we want to help. Let's get it fixed. If it's broken, let's fix it. Let's not make the excuse, we shouldn't be doing it, we shouldn't be listening to the excuses. Tell us, you told us the recommendation. I just like to know if the governor's supporting it, and then we can move on and see how we can tweak it from there. All right?
So Senator, just in response to your question about the Bureau of Women's Affairs, that law creating that bureau was enacted after the Commission on the Status of Women, and that's not one of the ones that we suggested for it to be abolished. We suggested that the Commission on Status of Women should be abolished because that was enacted back in the 1970s, and the purpose and intent of that law, first of all, that commission hasn't met in years, and it seems to be superseded by the Bureau of Women Affairs. But I think the point is that we now have, duplicative commissions and boards on the statutes, and so in order just to be clear about what is going to take precedence or what is established, it should be either one or the other, and I believe that the Bureau of Women's Affairs is now presently in office. I did want to answer one other question. I know this is, for Chairwoman Okada, but I did want to say that with the informational briefing, this is required by law, and it's not necessarily something that is something that the governor and the lieutenant governor have an imprint on or that they approve it. It's something required by law that we were required to do as part of that transition, that we are supposed to look through all of the different areas of government and provide a report about transition. Things that we found are issues, either problems or good things, but we're required by law to provide this informational briefing to you, and it's not a matter of whether or not the administration approves it or doesn't approve it. We're supposed to provide it, period.
Ma'am, I understand that. That's why I asked a very specific question. Do you know, if anybody here knows, if the governor supports any part of this? And if you don't know, then you don't know. But if you do know, just say you do, and if she supports it, I just like to move on it, and I understand the law requirement. That's great. Thank you.
Senator, I think it's a very valid question. A lot of people in the community are also asking, is this transition report the blueprint for the new administration? And I think that it begs clarifying. The platform guided the priorities. There's no question about that. You'll notice, if you're familiar with the Lou and Josh platform, that guided the priorities, because we have to undergird it with a philosophy. As far as the specific recommendations, those were made after an assessment was done by the subcommittees of the status of each of the agencies. So the recommendations themselves are forwarded not only to the governor, lieutenant governor, but also to you
Right.
as members of the legislature, because that's our mandate.
That's right.
So we want to clarify that we're not telling, we don't have the authority, the prerogative, or the arrogance to think that we can tell people with power and policy-making power what to do. But this is the best thinking in the short months that we convened as a community to put ideas together. This is our best thinking as a team of citizens that we offer to the decision makers. But I would venture to say that much of the recommendations, many of the recommendations, because some of them came from the agencies themselves, are worthy of addressing and taking seriously. So it's collective thinking from the community that we offer to the decision makers of our government. But there's a lot of agreeable stuff in it because people want to move forward. We're all committed to making sure that efficiency does result, that customers of government are truly served in the best possible way. So while we would never say that Governor Liu has put her stamp on every single one of the recommendations, we offer these recommendations to all of you as well as to the new administration to give serious consideration to.
And I want to make sure I end with thank you for the love and support of this report. This is a great report. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you all of you who did it.
Thank you very much. And that's why I wanted to make sure that I had the questioning after the fact, because we're already more than an hour into it. I do have two more of my colleagues. I'm going to address Senator Shelton and then Senator Castro, and then we will proceed through the whole 9 chapters. Okay?
Ms. Arreola, you mentioned the use of technology and teleconferencing for the boards and commissions to meet. And I know in the last legislature, there was a law that was passed to require that every board and commission promulgate their own rules and regulations. I was wondering if you found that any board or commission has already promulgated those rules, or if it would be your recommendation to have general rules for all boards and commissions, one general rule for them.
Well, I think that might be a really good idea because I think it's going to take a while for the different board members to get up to speed and to have all of their, the quorum as well for each of the boards, as well as a full, composite of board members who are on board. I mean, I think that's going to take some time. And so if rules and regulations are promulgated to have that, so it's across the board for every agency, even better. To try to require them or to try to get them to do it on a case-by-case basis and a board or commission-by-commission basis is going to be, it's going to be some delay, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Castro?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's probably no surprise, suffice it to say, I'm not familiar with the Lou and Josh platform, but I do want to say I did go through this piece, and I think it's an excellent tool. Some of the findings are known to us, those who served in the executive branch, and there are some recommendations that are novel, so I appreciate that. Some of the material in BSP, as an example, was already known to me as the former directors. So I just want to say that, and I do appreciate Senator San Agustin asking for me ultimately the hard question, to what extent is the administration going to adopt one or more recommendations? And so thank you for answering that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Castro. Dr. Okada, please.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I really appreciate your
Thank you.
accommodation of me. Thank you.
So I have to apologize, but our chairperson for economic development is currently off island, and he wishes to be offered another opportunity to present the findings of his committee at a later date.
Duly noted.
And so we would like to proceed with Chapter 3, which is Education, Culture, and Labor, and that will be presented by Ms. Kathy Gogui.
Good morning, Speaker, Senators. Thank you for having us here today. I'm not the chairperson for Culture, Labor, and Education. I sat on the subcommittee for culture, and the members of the Culture Committee were Teresa Ariola, Muña de Oro, Nicole Calvo, and Tesla Guanya, and we also had Dr. Sauter sit in with us on the committee on culture. We want to apologize that former Senator Rory Respicio and co-chair Therese Mantanani aren't available today. They weren't available to be here today for this presentation, so I'm going to do my best to cover education, culture, and labor. What we'd like to share with you folks is what our committee did, what I know what culture did is we did a score analysis of culture, and we analyzed the strengths, challenges, opportunities, and then the results or recommendations that we presented to the Angaro Tenorio administration as they were going to take over in January. Given the task, we did interviews, we conducted interviews, we collected data, and did on-site observations of some of the organizations within culture, labor, and education. And I will make this 9 minutes because, as the speaker said, we've already gone an hour. So you folks have the detailed report. I'm just going to highlight some of the recommendations that the various sectors had recommended. For education, we reviewed reports submitted by UOG, GCC, GDOE, and the charter schools, and determined the top overlapping issues, concerns for all institutions. And based on those issues and concerns, this is the priority areas that they suggested for the administration. The first one was budget, cash allotments, and diversification of revenues, the revenue stream. And I come from the Public Defender's Office, and we experience the same issues. So it's no different from education. It is for all of the government departments and agencies. Another priority area was facility maintenance and planning and modernization. That was another priority area that the committee wanted to work on. Efficient and effective use of federal funding. That was a priority. College career and life readiness, so that our students come out with a career or are productive in the workforce. And then recruitment, retention, and completion of high school and college degrees. That was another priority. For labor, they wanted to address the critical staffing needs. I know that they mentioned, and in the detailed report, it states that they need to hire a wage and hour administrator as well as a legal counsel for DOL. Revamp the Workmen's Compensation Commission. That was another priority for them. And then they wanted to prepare the American Job Center for outsourcing. Are we okay? I want the chair, okay. And then they also wanted to talk about, they also prioritized the review, structure, operations of certain programs, as well as address important miscellaneous concerns that they found at Department of Labor. What they wanted to do with the first 100 days with labor is transfer the Bureau of Women's Affairs and serve Guam Commission to Adelup, execute an MOU with the Office of the Attorney General for legal counsel, assign the Workers' Compensation Commission as a priority area, fill wage and hour administrator's position, I mentioned that earlier, review the governor's 15% discretionary Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funding levels, which should be approximately $450,000, as well as prepare for the DVOP audit in March, which is the Disabled Veterans Outreach Program, address the expired lease at Bell Tower, appoint members of the Workforce Development Board and serve Guam Commission, and review the breakdown of unclassified LTA positions and adjusting the staffing levels so that it meets the need of the organization and fulfill its mission and vision. For culture, which I mentioned I was a part of, and I worked tirelessly with Dr. Sauter and the team, this is some of the stuff that we wanted to do for culture. Establish a short-term Chamorro Heritage Task Force to plan and facilitate the reorganization of the Department of Chamorro Affairs, reorganize the Department of Chamorro Affairs, and enhance related programs through establishment of the Chamorro Heritage Authority, extend current contract with Galati Group, LLC, to manage the Guam Museum as an external contractor for another 60 to 90 days, support the Guam Museum's efforts to become an accredited museum, move the PBS KGDF Guam from under the umbrella of DCA, celebrate Guam's ethnic diversity through formalized networking under DCA umbrella, and the last priority that we had was promote regional collaboration as integral to our celebration of island heritage. So all of these priorities and recommendations are detailed in the report that we submitted to the legislature. Thank you for your time.
Dr. Okada?
So I'd like to proceed with housing, land, and natural resources. And we have Stephanie Flores that will be presenting.
Good afternoon, members of the 35th Guam Legislature, Speaker Barnes. My name is Stephanie Flores, and I am the chairperson for the Housing, Land, and Natural Resources Committee. The members of my committee were Joseph Borja, William T. Flores, Jesse G. Garcia, Ryan Mummert, Daniel G. Taitano, and Richard Ibanez. This subcommittee was tasked with reviewing the following entities: Guam Housing Corporation, Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority, Guam Environmental Protection Agency, the Guam Energy Office, the Department of Parks and Recreation, the Department of Land Management, the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, Guam Ancestrals Land Commission, and the Guam Land Use Commission, Territorial Seashore Commission. We were asked to ascertain the current status of each entity, identify the top priorities for each entity, make recommendations, discuss the implications, if any, of the fiscal 2019 budget on that entity, note any pending legal issues or recommendations made by either the Inspector General of the United States or the Office of the Public Auditor, and lastly, to identify the current staffing levels of each entity. For housing, there are two housing entities within the government of Guam, the Guam Housing Corporation and the Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority. They have similar missions and functions. As the speaker is very aware, she chaired the Housing Committee for many, many years, so she's more aware of what's going on in housing than myself or our committee members. Both are governed by 7-member boards of directors appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the legislature. Guam Housing Corporation, or GHC, was created to improve the general welfare of the inhabitants of the territory of Guam through the improvement of housing standards, the housing supply, and housing affordability on Guam. The Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority was created to be a public housing agency within the meaning of the United States Housing Act of 1937 and a local public agency within the meaning of Title I of the Housing Act of 1949, both federal statutes. In creating GURA, the Guam legislature found that there was an existing slum and blighted areas, as well as substandard and inadequate housing conditions and a serious shortage of safe, sanitary, and decent dwelling accommodations at rental or prices which family of low income can afford to pay. GURA further administers the Community Development Block Grant that is used to develop police stations, fire stations, community centers, and recreational facilities, among other projects for low-income communities. Neither GHC nor GURA are affected by the Budget Act, because they do not receive any appropriations to the Guam legislature. Guam Housing generates income through rental of affordable housing units and through its mortgage loan program, and GURA is 100% federally funded. Neither entity reported any pending litigation, personnel issues, or major audit findings. GURA's former board of directors, its former executive director, and its attorney are all involved in pending criminal matters related to violations of the Open Government Act. The agency itself is not a party to any criminal, civil, or administrative proceedings. It is the recommendation of our subcommittee that steps be taken to merge the two housing entities consistent with the Leon-Guerrero Tenorio platform. Further, it was recommended that the two entities should work together to maintain existing rental units, build new developments using project-based vouchers, for example, the very controversial Guma Tranquilidad. But that model is something that we had suggested in further detail in our report could be used as a source of leverage funding for building new developments. And to explore the possibility of selling existing single-family residential units to their current tenants at affordable rates so that more families can realize the dream of home ownership. It is further recommended that the mortgage credit certificate program be fully implemented. GHC has 23 classified employees and 3 unclassified employees. GURA has 78 classified or classified limited term employees, 19 temporary appointments, 3 unclassified employees, and there are currently 5, or at the time there were 5 vacancies at GURA that were funded but not filled. For the land portion of our committee, there are 4 different land entities that we looked at: the Department of Land Management, the Guam Land Use Commission, Territorial Seashore Commission, the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, and the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. The Department of Land Management is a line agency with the government of Guam with a director appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the legislature. The remaining 3 entities are separate commissions with commissioners appointed by the government with the advice and consent of the legislature. The only exception is the Guam Land Use Commission, which becomes a hybrid commission by adding 4 mayors when a project exceeds $3 million. In that case, the mayor from the municipality where the proposed project is located and 3 mayors from the adjoining municipalities will become members for that particular project. These agencies, DLM, CLTC, and Guam Ancestral Lands Commission, were at the time operating under 1 director within 1 budget by 3 executive reorganization advisories. Number 5, September 21st, 2011, number 9, October 1st, 2012, and number 10, June 7th, 2018. All 3 reorganization advisories, which were not executive orders, were issued by then Governor Edward Calvo and can be easily rescinded, which actually already has occurred. A reshuffling of funds will be required to provide for the salaries of each specific director. The DLM director is paid for by the general fund, while the salaries of the CLTC director and the GLC director can be paid for by their agency-specific special funds, not necessitating a new general fund expenditure. The separate administrators, Director of Land Management, Administrative Director of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, and the Executive Director of the Guam Ancestral Land Commission are all created by statute, and those statutes still remain in place. The Director of the DLM requires legislative confirmation, while the Administrative Director for the CLTC and the Executive Director of the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission do not require legislative confirmation. However, the Administrative Director of the CLTC is required to give a bond in the amount of $500,000 for the faithful performance of his duties. It is my understanding that at no time has the CLTC Director ever had the $500,000 bond in place. The committee recommends the immediate rescinding of the executive reorganization advisories mentioned to separate DLM, CLTC, and the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. Each entity needs to refocus on its separate mission and function. A system must also be developed to provide CLTC and GALC to the support necessary to carry out their missions. DLM can provide much of the support necessary, but CLTC and GLC should compensate DLM for the services rendered. Further, it is recommended that DLM work with the Office of Technology to have the land web system coordinate with the Department of Revenue and Taxation to capture accurate real property tax assessments. All 3 entities have considerable work to do to rehabilitate their images, and there is a serious lack of trust and confidence in these entities owing to the recent events related to employee self-dealing and preferential treatment for family members or, quote-unquote, the political elite. All entities have pending legal issues except the GLUC. The Budget Act of 2018 does not impact any agency except DLM. And DLM has 81 vacant, unfunded FTEs as of the writing of this report. And audits, the single audits performed by DOA are still ongoing, or at the time were still ongoing. For natural resources, we reviewed the following entities, which were the Department of Parks and Recreation, the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, and the Guam Energy Office. The Department of Parks and Recreation is an unusual entity. It is treated like a line agency of the government of Guam, but it also has a board of commissioners. The commission appoints the director and every year must report to the governor and the legislature on the activities of the agency. The mandates for DPR are outlined in 21 GCA chapters 76 and 77, and it is divided into 3 divisions: the Parks Division, Recreation Division, and Guam Historic Resources Division. The agency has purview of all territorial parks, all recreational facilities, and all Guam historic properties, as well as the Guam Register of Historic Places. This committee recommends that the procurement process be completed for the 2018 CIP grant received from the Department of Interior for the renovation of island-wide park restrooms and recreational facilities. Additionally, we recommend that the recreational water use master plan be updated, as well as the state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. The establishment of the recreational coordinators at village levels through partnerships with nonprofit and service organizations will provide a greater access to recreational activities for village youth. The public swimming pools need to be maintained and reopened. It is further strongly encouraged that further review be done to determine whether it is more appropriate for Historic Preservation Division be transferred to another agency within the government that deals with permitting. The Vicente Limtiaco Cemetery needs to be closed and a new public cemetery opened. Currently, funding provided for through the 2018 Budget Act is sufficient to cover payroll, but not much else. There are no legal issues reported and no adverse audit findings exist. There are 3 unclassified employees, 35 classified employees, and 11 limited term employees. At least 3 classified employees intend to resign or retire within the next several months. The Guam Environmental Protection Agency is governed by a 9-member board of directors. Each member serves a 3-year term. GIPA is responsible for the implementation of the Guam Beverage Container Recycling Act of 2010, the Water Resources Conservation Act, the Water Pollution Control Act, Toilet Facilities and Sewage Disposal Act, the Air Pollution Control Act, the Guam Pesticides Act, and solid waste. It is recommended by this committee that the Water, Air, Land, Territorial Electronic Record System, or the WALTER system, be implemented to help streamline customer service, improve interagency communications, and create a database of GIPA permits and projects. Similarly, it is recommended that GIPA have a presence at the One-Stop Permit Center. It is further recommended that the fee schedule be updated. It is recommended not only by this committee, but also the United States EPA, that a new facility be secured that is safe and free from environmental concerns and is large enough to house all agency functions. Lastly, it is suggested that the Guam Energy Office be made a division of Guam EPA or the Bureau of Statistics and Plans. There is no current legal issues and no adverse audit findings. Guam EPA is 98% federally funded, so the impact of the Budget Act is minimal. GIPA does receive funding from the Tourist Attraction Fund to pay for beach monitoring. There are 2 unclassified employees, 42 classified employees, and 8 limited term appointments. GIPA also did receive funding for the Recycling Revolving Fund to administer the programs that are covered by the Recycling Revolving Fund. The Guam Energy Office was created by Public Law 12-100. The stated purpose of the Guam Energy Office was to work with the federal government and the private sector to best allocate fuel available to the territory of Guam and to determine which energy conservation measures and practice best slow the rate of growth of energy consumption, assure adequate supplies of energy and fuels for necessary use, reduce energy waste, preserve natural resources, and protect the environment. It is recommended that the Guam Energy Office become a division under another agency like Guam EPA or the Bureau of Statistics and Plans. If this occurs, the funds used for the director's salary can be then used for a planner for division, a position which is needed to apply for and manage grants. Additionally, the agency needs to work more closely with DOA and BBMR for proper grant account setup and drawdowns. The Weatherization and Energy Efficient Appliance Distribution Program has been mired in procurement challenges and is largely unknown by the general public. most especially the target population of low-income families. A partnership amongst GURA, Guam Housing, and the Guam Energy Office will likely benefit the target population by providing energy-efficient air conditioners, refrigerators, and water heaters to low-income families that can be used in affordable housing units owned by GURA and Guam Housing. There are no outstanding legal issues and no adverse audit findings. The Guam Energy Office is 100% federally funded, so the Budget Act has no impact. However, the Trump administration has been cutting back on funding these types of grants that they do receive. There is only one unclassified employee at the Guam Energy Office and 5 classified employees. There is 1 vacant position. And that was our report for the different areas, and the further recommendations are in the larger report. So I'll wait until you have questions and everybody finishes.
Before I ask Dr. Okada to proceed, I'd like to welcome Senator Sabina Parrish for being here.
We'd like to proceed with providing information on infrastructure and transportation being offered by Senator Tom Etta.
Good morning, Senators. The infrastructure and transportation section of the report consisted of 44 pages. So I took that, divided it by 10, took the square root, and then I came up with this 1-page back and forth sheet. So for infrastructure and transportation, we looked at the Port Authority of Guam, the airport, DPW, and GRTA, and the Guam Solid Waste Authority. And to put the report into context, I think maybe a general overview would be appropriate. And we need to recognize that 90% of our consumables come in through the Port Authority of Guam. And most of our residents and visitors, they leave and enter Guam via the Guam International Airport. So for these 2 organizations, their throughput capability is certainly very essential. Now, to get these products to market and to get these visitors to their destinations, having good interior connectivity through our highways and road infrastructure is very key, and DPW, of course, is responsible for that particular infrastructure. At some point, we're going to really need to drill down more on the development of our public transportation, because on a small island where land is very limited, we cannot continue to build roads. And so the alternative of public transportation is certainly going to be very critical. And finally, solid waste management is critical to the quality of our community environment. So to start with the Port Authority of Guam, and present here this morning are the Deputy General Managers, Mr. Dominic Muña and Mrs. Connie Shinohara are here this morning during the Q&A, if there are any questions, they will make themselves available to answer. But for the Port Authority of Guam, throughput capacity, of course, is essential to the effectiveness of that particular facility. And so it's important that in achieving that, effort has got to be placed in the rehabilitation of Hotel Wharf, which will provide an alternative wharf facility, and also the rehabilitation of the F1 and Gulf piers, which are the piers that through which the fuel that is imported is offloaded from. It's important that we also begin to focus in on the contracting of professional services to develop the specifications and the solicitation packages for the timely replacement of our gantry cranes. So the gantry cranes that we have down there now, of course, are very essential to be able to offload the containers and cargo that comes in on our ships, get them loaded onto tractors and moved out of that port. But we've seen from the last round when we procured gantry cranes, there was protests that got tied up for a year. Gantry cranes aren't shelf items that we can go like to a park to an auto lot and just pick one out and then get it shipped to Guam. And so it's imperative that, of course, the port continue insofar as the leaning forward to be able to get some replacement cranes in. And finally, but on that particular issue, this is where legislative authorization may be needed, because inevitably the port may have to go out to the bond market to be able to purchase these cranes, to get the funding to purchase the cranes. And finally, the port may possibly need legislative authorization to reprogram approximately $15 million that was earmarked for the construction of the headquarters administrative facilities, and possibly reprogram that for other improvements at the port. At the airport, again, with that particular facility, throughput certainly is very essential for airport effectiveness. And so with that particular facility, of course, we've got to stay the course with the capital improvements that are ongoing right now, despite the fact that it certainly makes one very nervous about how the costs seem to be just rising and rising. A project that started out at 70 million, we are now at 117. And so, I think everything is being done as much as possible to contain those costs, and to compress the gap between the contracted completion date and what is now being looked at as the new completion date, which is about 9 months later. But this project is important, of course, first of all, to become compliant with the Department of Homeland Security requirements, and it adds capacity to the airport. There's also capital improvement projects that we got to stay on course with to expand the number of TSA checkpoints. Right now, with what they have, they are able to pass through about 700 passengers per hour. There have been times when there have been as many as 2,700 passengers that are trying to get through. So, to require 3 hours to get through the gate, we certainly need to address that. And that's being worked on right now. Now, we're going to need, the airport, of course, is going to need to develop ancillary airport structures, such as the parking garage, such as a new commuter terminal. And the airport does not have the capital to do that right now, but this provides the excellent opportunity to use other tools that may be available, such as public-private partnerships. But in using that, that's going to require legislative authorization because there will be a need for a long-term lease. So again, that's another area that I hope that the legislature will be looking at and leaning forward insofar as how a public-private partnership would work at the airport. And of course, there's the Tizan Parkway, which has been in the works. It's kind of stuck at the end there because there's still the need to require rights of way, and that's going to require appropriation from the government of Guam, because then federal highway money can be used to complete the roadway system. But until that right of way is acquired, money is going to need to be appropriated for that. And in addition to that, there's also federal highway money that's available to expand that Route 10 highway, which is right in, that passes in front of the airport, which is a very important artery coming off of Route 1. That's also going to require some legislative attention because there are some land issues there that's going to need to be addressed. And finally, the airport will be needing legislative authorization when it starts looking at refunding eligible bonds that we can go out and basically borrow cheaper money to pay off the more expensive money that was used to borrow. And so those are the areas that the airport certainly can, hopefully will be anticipating to be able to assist. In the area of infrastructure with the Guam Regional Transit Authority, and present here today is the Acting General Manager, Mr. Selva Bauta. I think there's a need to review the Enabling Act and amend it as necessary. So for example, the Enabling Act right now requires that the General Manager have 10 years of experience running a public transit system. And so clearly, we probably won't find that candidate here, and we probably need to take a look and review those requirements, and again, legislative support will be essential. We're going to need to also review the current operating model that would enable the GRTA to operate with greater autonomy. And in order to be able to do that, it's probably going to be necessary to enter into some kind of a public-private partnership. So for example, in the 2030 transportation plan that was done about 20 years ago, it estimated that an injection back then was needed of about $20 million to put in a fleet that was necessary to be able to provide the level of service needed. Well, of course, Gulf Guam does not have that kind of money to infuse right now, so a public-private partnership may be something that may have to be looked at. But as long as the GRTA is on a general fund subsidy, it's not going to be able to operate autonomously. So again, that's another area where legislative concurrence will be needed. The Guam Solid Waste Authority. This is something which is, we're right at the cusp of receiving that thing back from the receiver so that we can operate it and manage it ourselves. But I think what's going to be needed there is that the executive branch and the legislative branch is going to have to be a lot more supportive than it has in the past, and not just leave it to, you know, a bevy of lawyers to go in there and argue it in court. I think we're going to need to really get behind it and say, yes, we want this back. We don't need a receiver to handle this anymore. And finally, with the Guam Solid Waste Authority, we are getting to that point where they're going to need to construct a new cell for the depositing of solid waste. And that's an investment of about $13 million. And the decision needs to be made, do we want to invest $13 million to dig a new hole in the ground, or do we want to review our laws, one of them which prohibits the waste-to-energy alternative. And that is something that, as policymakers, I guess, needs to be looked at to see whether we want to go in that direction, because at some point we're going to run out of land up at Luzon, and we can't dig any more holes to bury our solid waste in. And finally, with the Department of Public Works. One of the limitations that Public Works has is, well, one of the requirements of Public Works is when buildings are going to be built, the architects have to bring these plans to DPW so that they can be reviewed and approved. Well, DPW has a real challenge in hiring technical professionals, registered engineers. And part of that is because of the salary structure. And so there's going to be a requirement to take a look at the compensation models for hiring, for example, professional engineers, and this will require legislative authorization. Finally, a new model for reviewing and approving building plans is needed. And again, this will require legislative authorization, because once economic development really starts taking off and a lot of these plans start flooding DPW, you know, that's going to become the choke point. But we're going to have to take a look at an alternative model where possibly You know, there's the self-certification, and which is used in other areas, but that is something that may need to be looked at. But obviously, the current model that we have for reviewing and approving building plans is just not working fast enough. And lastly, honestly, the funding of our in-house highway maintenance capabilities needs to be supported. FHWA comes in with the money to build the new routed highways, and it is the GovGuam's responsibility to maintain them afterwards. And DPW has the capability, but sometimes that capability is somewhat restrained because we don't give them the money to go buy the asphalt. So we need to support that. So hopefully when that is something during budget time that needs to be looked at. And so with that, if there's any questions, the people to answer them are sitting behind me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tom Etta. We miss you up here. Dr. Okada, please.
We'd like to proceed with the information on public safety.
Sorry, I don't know how to use technology that well. And I was tasked to lead the subcommittee for the Public Safety Transition Committee, Public Safety. In performing this task, I did look at the priorities of the Leon Guerrero Tenorio transition, and those were that there was a priority to improve the island's preparedness for emergencies, update law enforcement facilities, technology and equipment, enhance substance abuse treatment and rehabilitation programs, dedicate resources to corrections and re-entry programs, implement effective drug interdiction policies, increase public safety officers and reservists, restore neighborhood patrol, support neighborhood watch programs, implement community policing strategies, expand jurisdictional areas of law enforcement partnerships, thank you, and work to prevent and reduce juvenile crime. So all of those is a long litany of items that are easier said than actually written out and actually being executed. And the bigger thing that I realized and my committee members realized when we tried to handle this task was that there wasn't a lot of good data for us to really rely upon. Everything was based on anecdotal references, stories of hardships on going through procurement, through filling personnel slots, things of that sort. So there wasn't much for us to really hang our hat on, except that we tried our best in trying to move those hardships into a better position so that we could attain some of those goals that the administration had for it. One of the bigger problems was the budget impact. I think year after year, the legislature is faced with trying to best fund each one of these public safety entities, agencies, to best support and help the general public. And that is a daunting task, not only for Guam, but for, I believe, every single municipality or statewide or government agency in the United States. It's a tough task because public safety requirements are always changing. But it does come down to management, and that's what we saw that some of the problems were for each one of these agencies was they were always suffering reoccurring budget shortfalls. And it had to do with inefficient, ineffective organizations, misaligned job descriptions, and the reliance upon overtime and overtime costs. We also, like I had referenced before, saw that most of the reliance on the performance of public safety agencies was reliance on bad data. There wasn't a good source of good data that anybody could rely on aside from what was happening at that moment and what emergency that these agencies were trying to overcome at that particular moment. So we were looking at bad data that came from manual processes, from various management and leadership styles, organization, staffing, There wasn't a good handle on what was administrative staff, what was uniformed staff, and what could be civilian staff. There was also bad data surrounding what type of equipment did we have. Overall, what was expected as a standard, what was the potential with the costs and the funding that was available, and then what was the plan moving forward? How could we rotate this equipment to maintain a good, steady stream of good equipment to rely upon? And then finally, the funding that we have, there's appropriations and grants, that there was a disconnect on how to project that spending to last throughout the budget year, the fiscal year. And then there was also common complaints regarding procurement and personnel. When there was time or opportunity or funding to hire more public safety personnel, the lag time involved in that ended up, by the time it went through DOA, the funding for that position would have been exhausted because it was used in overtime to handle the certain tasks that public safety agency needed to perform at that particular moment. So they're always stuck in this vicious cycle of using overtime to pay for the personnel that they needed to staff adequately. And then the other issue is, and I think it's throughout the board, is GSA procurement issues that are constantly looking to fulfill the needs of equipment, supplies, things of that sort, but it was being held up because of procurement policy or procurement regulations or procedures. But looking at all that, I wanted to focus on what the common public safety goals that we could focus on, at least in the short term, to help alleviate some of those problems that were identified. And I characterize them as focuses. And the first focus was to enhance community involvement. I defined that as visibility, having more community outreach, being more accessible to the village mayor offices and other resources similar to that, and then also to support the reserve and volunteer efforts through Guam. I think those are all things that are already codified and within the law. It's just the execution has been a little bit lacking for whatever reason. The second focus was to find a way to get that better data. Where are we going to get that data from? How can we rely on it? And one of the recommendations for that was to look at creating an independent 911 bureau. I don't know if you senators know my history, but I am not a son of Guam. I have moved from Guam about almost 3 years now, and I used to work in the Twin Cities area of Minnesota. And while there, I did practice as an attorney for the county attorney of Dakota County and Olmsted County. So Olmsted County was a more rural area, but it held Mayo Clinic, and so it serviced a lot more people, but the general public there was more rural. And then my second job was working in the Twin Cities area, which was heavily populated, and we did see a lot of things. The difference there, I understand, and working on the civil side of the county attorney's office, was that there's a lot of more different streams of funding than we enjoy here in Guam. And I appreciate that, but we were able to get more funding and better utilize that funding and better keep track of that funding because of the data that we have. And most of the data, when it related to to public safety, came from an independent 911 bureau. So that was an emergency personnel that used technology to dispatch various public safety agencies to a certain emergency. For instance, here, if we were to call 911, it would be picked up by GFD personnel, a 911 dispatcher, and that person was then to decide, is this a fire emergency, is it a medical emergency, or is it a law enforcement emergency? And based on whatever that decision was made, if it was a law enforcement emergency, then they would turn around and say to the police dispatch that's also there, hey, there's an issue here and I think it's going to be your problem. That police dispatch would then pick up the phone and then organize whatever agency or whatever resources they have at that moment and dispatch, right? So just by that manual process of something that's supposed to be robust and responsive, you lose the goal and the spirit of that, and you end up having no data and very slow response time. And I think one of the things that we recognized was that there was no good data on what that response time was. We couldn't get any data to say when someone calls into 911, where are most of our calls coming from, for what type of calls, how long did it take for them to get there, and things of that sort. So working in those previous areas that I mentioned, an independent 911 bureau would be able to capture all of that, and then that source of that data would be more reliable and something that we could tout when we are asking for more money. We're asking our partners, our federal partners, for more grants, access to, and those sorts of things. So I think that was a recommendation that we had, is to look for opportunities to create better data and data that we could rely upon. And one of those ways was to look at a 911 bureau. The other focus was to better align our resources to fit community needs. I think looking at some of the mandates and the laws and the mission statements of some of the public agencies, they were created some time ago, and they might not be best aligned with our community needs today. And there needs to be a process to determine what is the needs of today and how can we revisit this time and time again on a periodic basis to make sure that we're shifting our resources and the needs where they are and when they're needed. And then finally was a need to invest in technology. Technology is always going to be a suggestion to better facilitate any procedure, any process, but technology needs to be best utilized and planned out and not just to have technology for technology's sake. I think there has been a lot of opportunity for a lot of our public safety agencies to collaborate and decide overall what can we do to, what sort of technology should we all be looking at as a group to best work for what we need it to do. I'm not sure if those conversations were had in the past, and the recommendation is to have it now, better implement and better plan out what technology you need and how it's going to affect you and your processes as you try to collaborate with your counterparts in public safety. So now I'm going to go through each one of the agencies that we did look at. For Homeland Security and Civil Defense, we generally looked at actually for all of the departments, 4 different areas: their financial condition, human resources, equipment facilities, and potential liabilities. And just to cut it all short, all of them had pretty much the same outcome. The financial conditions for all of them, federally funded or not federally funded, were always either just okay or in some sort of dire straits because of the use of the funds, because of the amount of funds that were given, or how these funds had been planned out. Human resources for public safety in general, they are short. They are short in every area based on what their mission statements are and their mandates are. And they're short because of funding, they're short because of the staffing patterns, but all of those things need to be revisited by those agencies to determine, are these job descriptions what we need them to be? Can we fill in positions with administrative civilian staff to make sure that our public safety officers are out doing public safety tasks and goals? And is there opportunity to consolidate some of the administrative staff and share it so that you can better utilize your funds and better streamline the processes for public safety altogether? Recommendations for Homeland Security was to prioritize budgeting for cost-sharing obligations. Wanted them to increase private entity partnerships to reach out better and to look at the businesses and all the private entities to have more of a hand in emergency preparedness. And then also a long-term goal was to expand the Emergency Operations Center. Currently, with the rise of Guam being targeted or being talked about as potential targets, I think it's the Transition Committee's recommendation is to plan for that and to understand that as we become more and more strategic, whether we like it or not for the U.S. government, we need to plan for how it's going to affect the emergency preparedness overall for the island. GFD, some recommendations for that was to, obviously the very first recommendation was to replace the E911 communication system. I know there's an RFP out for that right now, and they are working hard to do that, but that was a priority. That is the crux of public safety on Guam, is to make sure that there's access. And the access starts with that 911 phone call. And also to consider looking at creating new positions to better utilize our firefighters to do what firefighters are needed to do in terms of fighting fires, responding to immediate emergencies, and performing rescue operations. And some of those positions included a sole EMT position. So right now, all firefighters have to be EMT certified, but perhaps looking at maybe there's a job description where it's only an EMT and not someone who is a full-fledged firefighter performing those tasks. What we learned, again anecdotally and with no real data to back it up, was that 80% of GFD's operations are based on medical-related transportation. So it's based on their EMT services that they provide for the island. And if we were able to look at filling those positions with full-fledged firefighters, then it might help save in costs and might better provide better service for the island. And also looking at implementing a different shift program for the firefighters and determining what is the better option for Guam. And the recommendation, I'm a little bit hesitant to say that it's a hardline recommendation to choose a certain shift program, but it's definitely something to look at. While we were looking at that recommendation, the committee that I chaired did go out and look to see if other municipalities had looked at those opportunities to say, hey, an 8-hour shift is better, a 12-hour shift is better, or a 24-hour shift is better. And across the board, there is no one shift schedule that's better than the other. It really is based on the needs of the community, and those needs have to be assessed. And like I said earlier, it needs to be assessed periodically because public safety needs are constantly changing for any group of people or community. Finally, for GFD is to better support the Guam Firefighter Reserve Program. That is already in the law, but we were unable to determine whether or not there were efforts made towards really standing that up on its own and making it worthwhile and having a reserve firefighter capacity to respond in case bigger emergencies occur. DOC, some recommendations for them were to pursue revenue generating activities. There were talk of developing a commissary through there. Again, working in Minnesota, that was a good revenue generating and at the same time protection measure for most of the local jails and the state prisons. Is that right now I understand, again anecdotally, that DOC has to use some of their personnel to go through every piece of either laundry detergent, clothing, food, anything like that, they have to put aside 1 or 2 DOC officers to go through each one of those things. For example, for laundry detergent, right? So for someone bringing in laundry detergent, a DOC officer has to pour it into one bottle, make sure that there's nothing in there, and the substance and everything looks like laundry detergent, and then pour it back into that bottle and then go through it. Imagine doing that for every inmate every week to make sure that, that nothing is being brought into DOC that shouldn't be in there. A commissary would fix all of that. You have a vendor that you have some quality control over. You're making sure that, that it's a standard item, that it's not anything that is unsafe at the DOC or any other lockup. And also, you know, at the end of the day, it is a revenue generating opportunity to help fund some of the DOC costs and offset it. The other thing is to better look at the what our federal partners are using our DOC for. There's, again, some anecdotal reference that perhaps we are not recouping all of the federal monies that we should be recouping for housing federal detainees while there. And I believe what I understood was we weren't asking for that money because we didn't have the data to support that request. And so one of those things was to reach out and to look at that. And then another, in regards to recouping inmate and detainee costs, was the MOU with GMH. I understand that that relationship came out of a consent to get out of a potential problem of losing control over of DOC, but an MOU needs to be audited as well. You need to make sure that both sides are doing everything that they're supposed to be doing in terms of a contract. And I don't believe, based on our discussions with the previous DOC administration, there wasn't a lot of understanding of why things were being billed a certain way, or if people or the people at DOC were getting the care that they that was being paid for. I don't think there was a concern that they weren't getting care. I want to emphasize that. It was just a matter of, hey, is the billing correct? And there wasn't any auditing function for that. Long-term goals for DOC is that it needs a new prison. Recommendation in looking at how a better facility can be built and where those funding sources can be from. Right now, if any of you senators were to take a tour of DOC, you'll find that it's not built in a way to best utilize resources and to protect the public safety officers or the DOC people working there. The visibility isn't the greatest. The facilities altogether aren't the greatest, and it might be time to reconsider and look at whether or not a better facility can be built and where those funding streams can be. And then another recommendation is looking at enhancing detention, parole, and probation programs. You know, a lot of the problems of why we're over housed at DOC or any other jail lockup is because it's the cycle of crime that the island may be suffering, because there's not enough treatment programs, there's not enough re-entry programs that could help facilitate that and help people become better serving citizens rather than relying on a life of criminal activity. Customs and quarantine. Recommendations for that were also to create new job descriptions and looking at better ways to facilitate their activities, and maybe even rely on airport and port police to help them with some of their safety issues there. Again, there's the whole revenue recapture or revenue diversion programs problems, but it was important to look at that to see how they could partner up with some of those law enforcement agencies there. There's a recommendation to increase and modernize the passenger inspection fee and maritime air freight fee, restructure and review current lease agreements, And then also look at automating better systems to better capture what's coming in and use better efficient procedures to capture all of the taxes that they're supposed to capture, and also prohibit any contraband that's coming in that isn't supposed to be coming in. Their technology can help with that. A lot of our counterparts in Asia and definitely in the mainland United States are utilizing technology, and that's something we can consider. I know that some of the UOG students, and I was fortunate enough to sit in their presentation, had looked at one of their programs, I think for the previous Homeland Security advisor, and made some recommendations on how to implement that, and they should. That's one of the recommendations, is to look at that project and to see if it's something that can be easily adopted. And then finally, Guam Police, not finally, there's some more, sorry, I'm trying to be quick. Guam Police Department, recommendation for that was to revitalize community policing. I think in the past, there was a lot of dependency on neighborhood watch programs, but at the end of the day, neighborhood watch programs are supposed to supplement what law enforcement is supposed to do already, right? So you rely on the neighborhoods to give law enforcement the extra information that they may need to supplement their current activities. But it seemed to be reversed when we were asking about that or inquiring about it, that it was more of some law enforcement resources were being used to supplement neighborhood watch programs. So the recommendation was to revitalize that community policing, look at establishing minimum patrol standards, and then also look at positioning officers at various locations where the general public already knows to go to ask for help, such as the village mayor's office. Maybe look at areas like that where the general public knows how to get access to law enforcement. Also there to support police reserve programs, and also to look at centralizing dispatch and command. That way, again, to develop better data based on service calls, and then allocate resources as needed, whether it be on a day-to-day basis or on a year-to-year basis. DYA, the recommendation for DYA was to focus more on rehabilitation and preemptive approaches, and identifying pockets of the community that might need more support, and helping direct youth to a more stable and healthy lifestyle in regards to education and activities, rather than relying on some other potentially bad activities and ending up detained. So there's a movement right now, and I'm sure the senators know, that to not detain and to seek other ways of helping youths and intercepting those problems before it gets into the realm of locking them up or even into court. And so I think there was some movement towards opening more resource centers and being more active on just general activities. And I think that that movement should be continued, and that momentum should be continued as well. And that's all I have. Sorry I took up so much time. Are there any other questions or concerns that I could answer? Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Okada, you're ready.
And our final presentation this morning is for Healthcare and Human Services, that will be presented by Ms. Lori Duenas.
Speaker Tina Muña Barnes and senators here today. I'm going to be presenting the Healthcare Committee. And what we did is divided it amongst the different departments. Guam Memorial Hospital, Department of Public Health and Social Services, which included the professional licensure and the Medicaid and MIP. The Department of Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, the Department of Integrated Services for Individuals with Disability Council, and the Office of Medical Examiners and Medical Referral. The executive advisor was Francis Santos, and the chairs was Ruth Gurasamy and myself. Unfortunately, they weren't able to be here today, so usually I stay in the background, but today I'll be the one presenting. We took a look at the platform that was written up and talked about the affordable, available, and accessible quality health care and strengthening the families. And it was interesting that as I listened to all of the reports, the health information technology was always mentioned. And so the same thing with healthcare, advancing technology, modernization to improve health information technology, and electronic health records. The importance of having all the agencies talking to each other. Right now, we're so independent and to each his own. And not only in the different departments, but even within the departments, depending on what federal dollars they get or depending on who's supporting what, that's the kind of technology that they have. And we try to recommend that this be bridged. Cutting red tape and bureaucracy that prevents the health departments to hire and recruit on a timely manner. This has caused a huge problem, resulting on quite a number of vacancies. And yes, I understand when we had a meeting with Senator Talahi that, yes, all the other departments also had problems with staffing. But when you take a look at the criticalness of healthcare, and especially the one that has lost a lot of staff, and we are projecting a huge retirement in the Department of Public Health and Social Services. The other thing that we looked at was procurement. Procure essential supplies and equipment necessary providing health services, and amend the procedures that create a barrier to implementing federal grants. As all of you know, we return millions of dollars every single year to the federal government. And I'll share with you one experience that we just had recently. We were given $240,000 for a new generator at the Department of Public Health and Social Services Central Office. That was way back in 2015. We were given an extension, and now we're going to lose that funding by March 31st of this year, with no chances of extension. That's all been a procurement issue. The other thing that we added that was there was to ensure ADA compliance and invest in the health workforce, making sure that we have the staff that we need. Okay, I'm going to now go through some of the issues. I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible and just highlight on some of the recommendations. In regards to procurement, the problem has been the delay in process of procurement, which impacts timely securing of funds, implementation of federal dollars, and the return of those dollars when we haven't implemented. The recommendation is let's take a look at the process for GSA, for DOA, and see how we can reduce some of that or improve it. The Attorney General's Office, BBMR, analyze the flow and backup in the process. There was an implementation when we came in, and one of them was, it was a pilot project. What we were finding out was the backlog was over at the Department of Administration, and GSA, all of a sudden the backlog was in the department. And so that wasn't working, and there are other things that we're now taking a look. Increase ability to administer, to procure, lift the cap to procurement. Right now, the project is only for those under 10,000. You know what you can purchase with 10,000? Very little. There's also the look as far as 25,000, but we were saying 250,000. And this is based on the things that we have to go for in health, especially equipment. Face the cap, and directors in training, we ensure monitoring and accountability. The health agencies needs attorneys. They need that kind of input, and we need it before there's a case that actually goes to court. Right now, that's the only time when we're being really advised, and so that needs to be looked at. Just coming into the department, it seems like there are so many cases, litigation cases that are that we're being faced with. We need to make that available, and the governor has chosen to provide, to approve that we go this route. We will get that clearance through the AG's office. Eliminate GSA process for federal dollars. Federal government already has a system for how they evaluate the dollars that they give us, and we are audited every so many years, and they come, and I've been through these audits, and they scrutinize every single dollar that was given to the agencies. So why not either eliminate that, or the process that we have to go through, or at least reduce it? In the area of human resources, recruitment and hiring process, that also is a problem. The impact with delivery of health care with qualified professional staff and timely hiring of process. DOA classification of these professionals. Let me give you an example. For the line agency and even the autonomous agency we were made aware of during the transition, they still had to go through the same process, and what we were finding out is that some of it was taking more than 3 months. During my time, 3 months was long. Now it's 6 months. And we've also found that some of them have taken a year. And by that time, the individuals that were applying decide, I'm going to go. So they go to the mainland, or they go to private sector, and we lose the opportunity to hire these really excellent personnel. Our recommendation is to allow administrators to hire professional services, licensed employees with contract up to $350,000. And this was mainly to cover like your medical physicians and some of the other expertise. Improved licensure process, online application, verification process. If the health information system is in place, this would be taken care of. Senator Sheldon mentioned about how about having online board meetings, and we talked about that to reduce delay in process. And allow that those, because a lot of times they can't hold meetings because they don't have a quorum. And if you allow for something like this and you have the system in place, you can do it. Create a repository of professional data, transcripts, licenses that allows providers to access for primary source of verification. Reevaluate hire and salary structure for hard-to-fill professional positions. Public policy, introduce legislation to maximize resources. For example, nursing scholarship requires that the nurses have to go to the hospital. Well, why not Guam Behavioral Health? Why not Department of Public Health and Social Services to meet that requirement? And in this line, this talk, you know, the previous speaker talked about the policy. We need to take a look at all the mandates that are being regulated right now in the departments. Some of them are obsolete, outdated. You know, we could probably fine-tune a lot of the things that we have to do, like in public health, mental health investigation. We need to start asking the question, do we need to do this many? How many people do we need to hire so that we can do the investigations and not have an outbreak or not have any of these other health issues happening later? Expand community clinics and looking at schools and mayor's office. In the area of finance, there's a problem with chronic issues of charge master, collections, and maintaining receivables. So let's improve and cost report to maximize per diem per day reimbursement. And then the lack of fee structure. Right now, there's fee schedules that have been created, but the implementation of it hasn't happened. So we're talking about resources that could be coming in to be used. Revenue utilization review process. So the recommendations, short-term fund allocations, long-term funding, CIP for all buildings, and collection process. In the area of Medicaid and medically indigent program, and this is going to be an issue, and I'd like to thank Senator Terlai for really meeting with us to discuss some of these things that have been happening. Adult Medicaid federal match went up from $17 million to $56 million per year since fiscal year 2010. This was due to the Affordable Care Act funding, and it's going to end in fiscal year 2019, this year. If that happens, we've got to have a contingency plan. $101.7 million of affordable care funds are still unspent and need $83 million local match by September 2019. Fiscal year 2020 cap at $18 million, a 68% drop of that $38 million per year, needs to be offset. Adult Medicaid enrollment now at 22K may drop to pre-affordable care level of 13,000. MIP and uninsured may skyrocket in the year 2020. Some of the recommendations that came up, we have to look at Medicaid disaster assistance for the Marianas. Ask for 100% federal match, and that's going to take Congress, you know, and probably a resolution from this legislature. Remove annual Medicaid cap. Apply the FMAP and get 83% federal match. Restore Medicaid to COFA nations. And we're talking about the compact impact. Increase compact impact funding for healthcare based on the MIP money that's being spent every single year. Assign senior staff to Medicaid and MIP initiatives until resolved. Now the big one, health information technology. All of the agencies talked about the health information technology, which is so independent of each other, without any sharing of information. And there is a push to get this through, and some of it may result in getting a reduced federal funding if we don't have it in place. The electronic health record system not integrated within agencies to help patients navigate between acute to primary care. The Bureau of Statistical provides data and needs to be needs to be tied to healthcare agencies. Medicaid database is billed 90% paid by Medicaid payers and 10% local funds. Maintenance of the fees on the electronic health record are expensive and do not talk to each other. And we found this throughout all of the agencies. So our recommendations is a central repository, an electronic health record that talks to each of the healthcare agencies so we can share information, such as immunizations, such as illnesses, diseases, that they're being shared across the agencies. If you take a look, because we don't have good data collecting and health information, go to the World Health Organization system or go to Centers for Disease Control or any of these, and you will see that Guam and then the data that's being requested is NA. That shouldn't be happening. And so we need to really work on that. The last one is accreditation certification. There are opportunities now for every single health agency to get accreditation or certification. And so the problem is that all healthcare entities working towards accreditation certification, one of the things that was identified by the physicians, and there was a physician team that actually did a survey, is the buy-in of the physicians. And so there's a push. Right now they're working on having a healthcare summit sometime in the next 2 months to address this and to share with the physicians the importance of buying into accreditation certification, into the payment plan. The recommendations is content expert training for all healthcare agencies, obtain either Joint Commission accreditation or other accreditations that's out there. CMS accreditation, maintain certification and obtain certification, and then obtain public health accreditation. Right now, we are working towards public health accreditation. The transition document has all the breakdown from the different departments, and I'm going to leave that up to you to review, and because it is getting late. And so if you have any questions, we're available, and you can contact us anytime. Thank you.
Mrs. Duenas. Dr. Okada.
So I'd just like to point out that the committee chairs we have for military affairs, federal affairs is not available this morning to present. And so if there's a request to have a presentation at a later time, we'd like to so avail of that opportunity. And the Government Finances Committee is also not present today, but there was a briefing that they made about a week ago in the budget. There was a budget briefing that was made about a week ago, but if there's additional information that can be provided by that committee, we'd like to avail of that opportunity as well. So as a result of all the presentations this morning, the information, the summaries that were provided by the Transition Committee reports were created based on information and available data that was provided to the teams, in addition to interviews that were conducted. While this report does not reflect the entire picture of each of these respective agencies, it certainly provides a roadmap of recommendations for consideration and implementation. This concludes our informational presentation this morning, and the committee chairs are here and available to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Okada, and I know my colleagues have a lot of questions. And I know in the interest of time, because we do have a Committee on Rules hearing in less than, I think in an hour, and lunch, we didn't anticipate not to eat lunch. But I want to say that I'm going to give the opportunity for my colleagues to ask at least a question. And then what we will do is I will not adjourn this informational briefing. I'll call to recess and then set a time so that maybe the full team can come back with us and share any updated questions. And if there's any updates from the administrative part, we probably have an even more in-depth opportunity to get all the questions in place. Is that okay? So at this time, Senator Torres?
President Okada, what I wanted to ask was whether your committee, perhaps it would be budget, had looked at the effect of the different pay scales and whether that factored into some of the issues with regard to recruitment and retention amongst the agencies, and whether there's some recommendation, because as we're aware, there are different pay scales among the government: technical, professional, the Hayes study scale, the law enforcement, and others. And maybe that's a question that's to be answered for another time, but I think as we look at everything, and the repeating theme is personnel, lack of personnel, lack of the ability to recruit and retain, and I wonder how the cannibalization amongst agencies is affecting that because of the disparity in the different pay scales. So if it, you know, you can, I don't know if you've done that, but I'd appreciate.
So we will certainly, I will take that question, and we will certainly, at another opportunity, provide the response to that question.
Senator Torres, the other issue that kept coming up was the outdated position descriptions in the classified service. So there's a great need to update, particularly with technology and with different kinds of requirements that speak to readiness. So I think there needs to be a comprehensive effort to update and include positions that were never thought of in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when these position descriptions were written by the government in civil service. So you're certainly touching on something that we continuously heard in our interactions with the agencies.
I just have of course, many questions for the departments, but I'll leave those off for now. Just wanted to ask the transition team I mean, we find it very helpful, the report, and so I want to thank you all for all your work. But do you think that this report could be done in the future earlier than February, than the deadline that's currently set in the law? Like, can we amend that law and make it earlier? Because I think it would be helpful. Of course, the earlier the better. We've already approved directors without having, or had their hearings without having this information available. So I just want to know if you think that's possible to do in your experience.
I think given the enormous task of compiling all the information in a transition between an outgoing administration, an incoming administration, requiring the report to be done in February, if I had more time, I would ask for more time. But surely the committees did a lot of work through the holidays in order to get this information through, and in preparation for all the activities associated with the actual transition. Many of the transition committee chairs have assumed roles in this administration, and so that was, they had to step into their new roles at the same time of completing the report that, and so I think having it done in February is a reasonable time. If the choice were given to me, I would ask for a little bit more time, because at that point, many of the directors would have just been positioned into the agencies and looking at some of this information for the first time if they didn't participate. And so I think February is a reasonable time as it currently stands.
What about if there's a template that outgoing administrations have to fill up so that half of your work could be done, possibly, and then, and then the rest? I don't know if that would be something to think about, but I just think, something to make maybe the transitions, because some of the reports are different also, right, and the information that they got, and so to remove maybe some of the subjectivity, or starting from scratch every time, maybe if we could have a template that outgoing administrations must fill out for the transition committees, and then they can move forward with additional information.
I would say that that a lot of the information obtained was, of course, with the assistance of the outgoing administration, and we did get the full support of Governor Calvo and his team to our teams that went into the various agencies and continued on in these conversations. And so I would say it was very helpful for each of the respective subcommittees to obtain their information, not necessarily through a template, but based on the information that we were trying to retrieve based on the guidance that we provided to our teams.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Is this the report that is it everything, or are we expecting more?
This is the final report.
All right, thank you very much.
Senator Chulai, Senator Perez.
I don't have a question, but I just have a comment. I just want to thank you for all your hard work putting all this information together. I think it's a foundation for us as senators. We want to keep the momentum going. And as oversight of procurement, I would like to create a procurement task force as soon as next week if time avails. I think it's unfortunate that we leave money on the table, and the fact is we have delays when we procure things. It takes a year, up to a year, just to get procurement. And I refuse to believe that this is the Holy Grail. Procurement reform is a Holy Grail. So I do want to hopefully get some of the contacts who have been working in procurement and have maybe even best practices that other agencies can utilize. Yeah, so I'm open to ideas and how to expedite procurement. Thank you.
Senator Perez, Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm hoping with this labor of love that you've done that we can continue to work forward on the objectives and at least accomplish as much as we can. We're following up with the executive branch with maybe quarterly meetings. That'd be nice. But just to let you know, as your senator, I'll be using your report as some direction to provide some legislation changes that I can do. So as we move forward and if things come up and we get some public hearings, I'll be coming back to all of you to help me out. So before you leave, I need some phone numbers because I need some testimonies later on to keep this going. So I want to thank you for your summaries, and I understand I do have a lot of reading homework to do, so thank you so much.
Senator Moylan, and before we recess this informational briefing, I want to extend my own dunkle and a as each of the presentations were going down, and of course the team that is here with you. We do have so many action items that we can work with. And when Senator Moylan spoke about true labor of love, this is the time when we can say that our people, for a better Guam, for a better life, to better the quality of life for our community, this is what it takes. It takes that interaction of getting the support from the last transition to work into the new transition. And with everything that was brought up, from resources to repealing to restating to asking for training to, I mean, the list is almost endless. But the support that you guys give on the volunteer basis, and I know that we're going to recess this afternoon. It's going to be 2:20 when we recess. I will ask the team to come back. I will note to the listening audience, the community of Guam, that individuals who wish to submit testimonies or have questions that they would like to have the transition team look at or answer to, they can do so by submitting it to us at speaker@guamlegislature.org, or you can hand deliver your inquiries or comments to us at 163 Chalan Santo Papa, Hagåtña, Guam, and we will note for the record, work closely with you guys to set the part 2 of the information briefing update. And again, if you can extend to the administration our many thanks for the hard work that you volunteers have done on behalf of the people of Guam. Sijus Masi, Sainamasi, and God bless each and every one of you. It's 1:18 p.m.